my friends, the great experiment.
The view, Picard. Hidden trick.
Would you look at that?
The greatest trick. And you people, you're all astronauts on some kind of Star Trek. The greatest trick.
Welcome to Greatest Trek. It's a new Star Trek podcast from the makers of The Greatest Generation. I'm Ben Harrison.
I'm Adam Pranica.
We have a special guest who has a special guest on this off-season episode of Greatest Trek. Our guest today, Jesse Thorn, our pod daddy, and yours.
Ben, we're all very special here.
Thank you for joining us, Jesse. The reason we're having you on here in the Marin Open of the episode is because we are going to be rebroadcasting your interview with the legendary Sir Patrick Stewart from your smash hit NPR radio show, Bullseye.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of a different NPR radio show that I must host because Bullseye is not a smash hit, but it is an NPR radio show. I think that's fair to describe. Yeah, it's...
I just love being the third in the modesty measuring contest that you two have for life. It's great.
Well, this show is very popular, and I think that people will really enjoy the interview you did with Patrick Stewart. I just listened to it yesterday, and I learned a ton. I mean, you sat down in person with him, right?
Yeah, it was like, it's weird because I obviously, like, for Bullseye, I interview many, many famous entertainers, but rarely at this point, does it kind of catch me short. But looking at Sir Patrick Stewart is like looking at yourself when you're 11. It is like staring directly into your, adolescence.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool. I mean, he is the loveliest man. He's very old, but really on it. And it was just cool. I mean, what's funny is these days at the office, when people come in, we are doing COVID testing. And so there's this sort of like odd... And we have an open plan office. So there's this sort of odd 18 minutes where we are trying to greet the guest and make them comfortable, but also stand 10 feet away from them. And it was just wild to see this small elderly man who is also definitely more physically fit and stronger than I am, could destroy me with a single glance. Like it was a thousand things at once.
Yeah.
Did he have a good firm handshake? Did he give you a hug after the test was over?
God.
Tell me about his physicality more, Jesse.
I'll tell you this. This guy has guns.
He's got the pipes.
Patrick Stewart has guns. I don't know do you guys know about you guys are the guys who would know about this. What's his workout regimen? Not to paint with too broad a brush here, but
I mean, I've only fantasized about his workout regimen, but for a while on our show, we kind of reverted to calling him JL Pipes because in Star Trek First Contact, he does all those like action movie moves with his tank top on, and you can really see the guns. And the guy's in great shape. I
found myself wondering as I was watching him whether he should leave aside all of his philosophical French countryside adult prestige television work and just make a Taken.
He should just make a Taken.
Could see him pounding some dudes.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, so the interview that we're about to play is very wide-ranging. You talk about Blunt Talk, another show that he made in addition to some Star Trek stuff. I feel like he kind of brought it back to Star Trek a lot more often than you did. Like he constantly references his cast members from TNG and like talks about anecdotes about getting along with them and stuff. What was your strategy for the interview? It's kind of a survey of his entire career, but more focused on television than films, I would say.
I mean, I thought like it's always hard to decide, especially with somebody that has, like I had Paul Dooley on the show the other day, who's, I mean, probably most famous for being the dad in Breaking Away, but like was in every from 5 Robert Altman movies and co-created the Electric Company and was in the original New York cast of the second, and he's 95 years old. It's like, okay, I got an hour. Which of these things am I going to leave aside? I think it would have been ridiculous for me not to talk to him about Star Trek. I also think I had to kind of beginner's mind it with Star Trek because I was like, I don't want to ask the broadest questions. So I just need to pay attention and see if I notice anything. Mm-hmm. Because I couldn't cover all of Star Trek in an hour with him. You know what I mean? Like, it would be ridiculous. And then if I did that, I would only talk to him about Star Trek.
I mean, that's what we would have done if we had done the interview. But
well, it would have been for a Star Trek show. It would have made sense. But it's funny, like I was talking to him in that awkward 15 minutes before we were allowed to stand close by to each other. He was talking about seeing the Next Generation cast members making Picard and just going out to dinner with them. And I was talking to him, my friend Danielle's father was the late Walter Koenig. And she always talked about how they all just liked each other, except for Shatner. They were all just like real loving friends with each other. Like they were each other's best friends. And the fact that their careers were all tied together by this weird TV show that they did for 4 years or whatever it is.
I think. It was like 2.5.
That was fine with them because they all loved each other, right?
Yeah.
And it was very clear that Star Trek was transformative for him, not only because it made him a star, it took him from working actor to celebrity, but also I think because it came at a very difficult inflection point in his life as he was entering middle age and his family was breaking up and all these things were happening for him. And it kind of transformed his approach to creating art. There's this anecdote that I, feed him in the interview that is a story he's told a lot of times that I bet you guys have heard, but was so telling, which is basically him getting huffy with the other cast members that they are not taking it seriously enough. And they basically say to him, dude, this is a film set. If we took every moment seriously, we would kill ourselves. We need to enjoy our work. And you kind of get the impression that was the first time it had occurred to him to enjoy his work, to not have to, rather than living his life trying to prove that he was something, because he, is Northern English guy who never, I think, felt fully comfortable in the kind of Shakespeare and received English world that he worked in previously and hadn't been extraordinarily successful. Again, he was he worked throughout, but most of the stories in his book from that time are just somebody wanted to cast me in this show, but they said I didn't have the name. So that relationship with those people changed his way of being in the world was kind of the impression that I got, that going through all this awful stuff in his personal life, coming out the other end of it, still having these people from his work life and them kind of teaching him those lessons while his career was transformed was the pieces that came together that gave him the second half of his life.
Jesse, speaking of the trauma that changes a person, I know this didn't come up in the interview, but I'm wondering if it did maybe beforehand or in the book.
Are you going to bring up that both he and I are bald? You going to bring up about how we're bald kings?
I'm attracted to bald men. Seriously? Seriously.
Did Patrick Stewart say anything about the famous SNL sketch Sexy Cakes, the erotic bakery?
You have come to the right place. I have the perfect sexy cake.
You sent me Sexy Cakes. I had not seen Sexy Cakes since Sexy Cakes was on TV. And I thought long and hard about how I could spend some time talking about Sexy Cakes on National Public Radio, a venue that
Right.
that does not welcome sexual content.
I mean, this is bakery content, though. I think you
Okay.
can make that case.
Well, I think you'll find that it's a little more fun than an ordinary bakery.
That's fair. So I just brought up Blunt Talk instead.
Yeah. I mean, like Ira Glass can like get on and say, like, just in case you're listening with children, we do touch on some topics that are slightly spicier in this episode. Why can't you do that, Jesse?
I represent, I know, a large majority of FODs by wondering why in the hell you didn't bring up sexy cakes
So
in this interview and taking great umbrage with that.
can I say something about Blunt Talk, since we're already probably planning a Blunt Talk recap members only podcast?
Yes, more blunt talk, less sexy cakes. That's what everyone would prefer. Yeah.
The monumentally successful television show Blunt Talk.
Somebody Google ruptured testicles.
I was thinking about Blunt Talk because I loved Blunt Talk. I'm sure you guys watched it. Did you like it?
I haven't seen it yet. I'm
Really?
embarrassed to admit. Yeah.
Holy cow.
I've really liked every Jonathan Ames thing I've watched, but I have blind spots, man.
I tried it and couldn't stay with it, but I've seen sexy cakes like dozens of times, probably, maybe even hundreds.
Yeah, it's very sexy.
The idea that you guys are not on the Blunt Talk train is blowing my mind right now. So Blunt Talk, it was a great show, in my opinion. Maybe not as, it didn't gel as perfectly well as Bored to Death, which is one of my favorite shows ever that Jonathan Ames also created, but
Oh yeah, that rules. I love that show.
shares his similar sort of truly bizarro perspective on the world. And I was thinking about what I liked about Patrick Stewart in Blunt Talk. And it was something that Ted Danson also brought to Bored to Death, which is a sort of open-eyed, sweet sincerity, like an engagement with the world on its own terms. And I tried to, I don't know if I did a good job asking Patrick Stewart about that, but like that was like, to me, that was the special thing about his performance. Like it could have just been guy with a lot of gravitas plays against his gravitas.
Like sexy cakes.
Yeah. Or does a parody of, you know, like it could have been, it could have been Leslie Nielsen or, you know, any of the many jokes where somebody is really serious, but they're talking about something dumb.
Right.
And I think that what's really funny about like a sexy cakes kind of thing. But what I think is special about his performance is just how much warmth and like baffled curiosity he brings to it. And it's such a nice thing from when you see, you know, Patrick Stewart look at people with a steely-eyed gaze and like point to them meaningfully and say phrases of science fiction nonsense.
Would you like to buy a cake with a woman going to the bathroom on
Right.
it?
Yeah,
Something
it's a
like
very
that.
funny sketch. I'm not,
Yeah.
it's no, look, if he had been, as any committed listener of Bullseye with Jesse Thorn knows, if he had been in the Saturday Night Live sketch, Tales of Fraud and Malfeasance in Railroad Hiring Practices,
Sure.
we would have
That
talked
would
about
have
it
been-
the entire hour. It would have
Everyone
just been,
has their own foundational sketch.
Yeah.
I get it.
Somehow I'm just thinking of Larry King saying, Tales of Fraud and Malfeasance in Railroad Hiring Practices for the hour.
Can I tell you guys a Star Trek public radio thing?
Oh yeah.
Years ago, maybe even before Bullseye was called Bullseye, maybe back in the Sound of Young America days,
It hadn't even come out of the bowl yet.
I was with Public Radio International, a now defunct public radio distributor, competitor to NPR, or, you know, whatever, complement to NPR. And I would get really frustrated because I couldn't get my show on any stations.
It was the Godzuki to NBR's Godzilla.
Yeah. And I was having this conversation with like my guy at PR. Like I had a guy at PRI and he said, Jesse, I really understand this. He's like, can I give you some serious advice? And I'm like, yeah, what's that? And he's like, just book people from Star Trek, station people like people from Star Trek. So just try and get Star Trek people.
I like that character work you're doing, like the sort of trail off sort of voice that people like that often have.
Yeah.
It's great.
But we had George Takei on the show one time.
Do you think that the like humorlessness of public radio program directors works against the likelihood that if public radio program directors like Star Trek, they might like our show?
Yeah, I think that might be a problem. The thing that I think connects public radio people with Star Trek, and I've thought about it a lot, because I think there's a lot more Star Trek people than Star Wars people or other types of nerd in public radio world. I feel like people in public radio are, and there's a generation of people in public radio inspired by Ira who maybe have slightly different values, but your classic public radio people are inspired by a kind of deeply sincere idealism that is also what a lot of people's connection to Star Trek is. And I know you guys have built a career on being glib about this thing that you care so much about. But I think that, the thing that makes Star Trek special always has been that it like tells these stories that are about, ultimately about like, what if humanity was better, right? Like, what if there was some for real thing that we could see and observe that reflected the best in humanity. And I think that same kind of like really sincere idealism was what led people to invent public radio and be like, no, what people really want is more coverage of congressional hearings. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've been doing a survey of sci-fi from like the mid 70s through 2000 for a project that we have coming up on this very show. And in doing that was just looking at all of the like kind of mid to low budget sci-fi shows that came out in that time period and how fucking bleak so many of them are. And I think that something that sort of ties it back to your interview with Patrick Stewart is like his energy is so sincere and optimistic in the interview and has been all through his career. It's sort of what makes Captain Picard such a great character and the blunt talk guy such a great character in the same way.
The sexy cakes guy too, I think.
Yeah, I think the sexy cakes guy has a sincere optimism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, I guess you can say I sexed it up for you. No extra charge.
I mean, I think it's like fight. I mean, if you read his book, his life is like fight. What if there was a different way to live? Not like punching fights, but just like constantly gears grinding, trying to push through mud. And then finally, like, what if you allowed ease to be part of your life? Plus, I think he blazes trees. I'm not like, it seems like the dude blazes trees, right?
Kind of got that feeling, yeah.
This guy puffs ganj, right?
Yeah. Chucks clouds. Well, why don't we throw to the interview? This is a special presentation of Bullseye from NPR, hosted by Jesse Thorn, interviewing Patrick Stewart.
Thanks, Jesse. And thanks for recording that bumper for our 500th show. That was really great.
Yeah, that was
Thanks for doing that.
Really, really nice of you.
He was nice enough that I was like, yeah, I think I could do this. I could get him to do this.
Was it the choice between asking to record a bumper and talking on mic about sexy cakes, even though you would promise to edit that part out of the version that would go to NPR?
So you're saying that I would talk to him about sexy cakes just for me and you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that could have aired on this version of the thing.
I mean, introducing our 500th episode was for me and Ben.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for thinking of me to ask him for that favor. How about that? Do I win the contest, Adam?
I appreciate you, Jesse. Thanks.
It's always slightly terrifying to get the two of you in a room together.
Why is that? We get along famously.
Daddy and Daddy are fighting.
Yeah, you're two of my best friends, and I'm like worried that you won't like each other every time.
We're breakdance fighting comedically. It's great.
It's good. It's good. I'm going to calm down.
Adam, remember that time we had lunch at Dino's Chicken? That was fun.
Yeah. We have lunch all the time.
Yeah. Me and Adam have lunch all the time.
You know what's weird about the lunches we have? Jesse insists that they're all you can eat for lunch.
Wow.
Yeah. I only eat at buffets.
Yeah.
Lay it out for me, I say to restaurants.
Yeah, and we spend 2 or 3 hours. Whenever they do the switch from lunch into dinner, that's how long we stay normally.
Whenever Jesse invites me to lunch, it's like he texts like 4 different people that might be available.
You're on my neighborhood group chat, Ben.
Yeah, apparently so.
Adam lives on the west side.
We'll cut all this out.
How about no?
You guys need to go to couples therapy. I think there are some issues here.
Adam, we're in couples therapy, just not with each other. How much intro are we supposed to do for this 40-minute interview?
Enjoy this special presentation of something more sincere than this.
Engage.
I think when one has been angry for a very long time, one gets used to it. And it becomes comfortable, like old leather. And finally, it becomes so familiar that one can't ever remember feeling any other way. Thank you, Chief.
Well, Patrick Stewart, welcome to Bullseye. I'm glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jesse. Happy to be here.
That clip sets an interesting tone for the rest of our conversation. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, happily.
When you set out to write a memoir, you weren't working because of COVID. Everything was kind of shut down. Did you take the opportunity to call anyone and ask them what they remembered?
Yes, I did. There were a couple of people that were very generous in giving me names I couldn't remember, or when did this happen, I was saying, because my detailed memory is a little hazy at times. But largely what I did, because I had turned down such an invitation, I think twice before. And it was only this time when my agent said to me, look, you're not going to work because there is no work. And it's going to be like this for a long time. So what are you going to do? Do your jigsaw puzzles? I do jigsaw puzzles. And he said, look, why not give it a shot? And if you don't like it, well, you can dump it and we'll repay their advance. And I said, okay, but I'm serious. I'll give it a couple of weeks, but if I can't do it, I'm walking. But I spent the first 2 weeks not writing at all. But I did go for long walks, and I thought about the past, not just the distant past, although that was what I enjoyed most. And I found that as I opened one door a little bit onto my childhood, another door might just suddenly open that I had not been aware of for decades. And unfortunately, a lot of my generation have passed away. And there were people I wanted to say, do you remember when? Well, where did that happen? But I wasn't able to. So I let my recollections develop and grow. And particularly insofar as it concerned my parents and my relationship with other actors, with other directors, with my English teacher, who was the first man to put a copy of Shakespeare into my hand, Cecil Dormand. He and a wonderful acting teacher, Ruth Wynne Owen, are the two people to whom my memoir is dedicated, because not only did they teach me valuable things, but they also believed in me. And for years, I didn't have much belief in myself. I thought that I was ill-equipped to be doing what I was doing. And very often I found myself surrounded by university graduates, for example, and some very fancy ones at that. And so I often felt I'm out of my depth here. These people know so much more than I do. But still, other people like Ruth and Cecil, my English teacher, they believed in me, and they believed that there was something there, something more than I suspected.
Were you worried to spend time thinking about your childhood and, you had a painful home, or, to spend time thinking about your marriages that ended in divorce or other things that you wish could have been different about your life?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, thanks to several decades of therapy and working with a brilliant therapist, mental, intellectual therapist, they helped me come to terms with a lot of that, so that by the time I'd finished writing the memoir and then fixing bits here and there that I didn't like, I found that my attitude to my parents, to the two women that I divorced, began to change. And I found that I was accusing myself a little less than I had done in the past. Even as a child, the violence in our home, the danger, the risk, for a long time I felt that I was responsible for it. But I wasn't. I think I actually did quite well with that. And it's a great opportunity to be invited to investigate your own life.
Your father was a very commanding person who was a veteran, a distinguished veteran of the Second World War, had been mostly absent from your life because he was in the service until you were like 5.
Yes, he did come home on leave because he wasn't actually at Dunkirk. He was in Cherbourg, but he was part of the British Expeditionary Force that had invaded France. And of course, they got met with so much weighted fire from the Nazis that they had to run for it. And my father, who was further south than Dunkirk, when he got back to the UK and he was safe, although, as I learned from an expert on these things, that he was, without question, suffering from what he had been told was shell shock, which is the term that they used, and is now called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And when I learned that, and this was only about 20 years ago, I began to feel so differently about him, that he had had 5 or 6 years. When he was demobbed and he left the army, he had been a founding member of the parachute regiment. And his status when he left the army was regimental sergeant major. He was the most senior non-officer in the parachute regiment. And he had had a spectacular military career. And he was very impressive because I have met 1 or 2 people who served with him. The most wonderful and astonishing thing that I learned about my father was when a man I met in the street who said, "Come into the pub, I want to buy you a drink in your father's name." And he said, the most memorable thing about your father was when he marched onto the parade ground, the birds in the trees stopped singing.
My father was a vet, a Navy vet, and your father was what you call a weekend alcoholic, which is to say that he was white-knuckled during the week or was dry during the week and then drank very heavily on the weekends. And I used to go to AA meetings with my dad when I was little, when he was a single dad. And we went to vets' AA meetings. And I'd color in the back, you know what I mean? But I heard enough stories when I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years old from vets about that experience and lived with my father's PTSD. And one of the things that is so scary about being a kid with a parent with combat PTSD, at least was for me, and I think maybe is something that you might relate to, is the feeling of powerlessness when your parent is in an unreasonable place, right? That like part of PTSD is, a flooding amygdala, right? Like an overactive fight or flight. And when somebody's like that, you can't tell them anything. You know what I mean? You can't convince them of anything. And that's a really scary thing to experience when you're a kid.
Yes. I do remember one bad night, a weekend night, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, when my father drank, when he had hit my mother very hard and she was lying on the floor bleeding. And an ambulance had been called by a neighbor and the police too. And I remember hearing that a policeman turned to my mother, who was, of course, in pain and distressed and upset, and I think especially so that I had witnessed it. And the policeman said, "Mrs. Stewart, what you have to understand is that it takes two people to make an argument." And I was so outraged that it was one of the first moments in my life when I wanted to hit somebody, because what he was saying was so incorrect and unfair and punishing to my mother. She wasn't responsible for any of that. She was trying to protect her children and myself and my brother, who was 5 years older than me. But they were challenging times. I've recently been thinking a lot more about my childhood. I actually, 2 days ago, came across a schoolboy's diary. It's dated 1954, when I was 13 and 14. My birthday's in the middle of the year. And I'd had this book in my hand once or twice before, and I just flicked through it. But 2 nights ago, I just started reading it, turning over every page and reading what I was doing with my life then. And again, doors began to open. It's made me think, the first draft of my book was 750 words. Sorry, pages. 750 pages, yes. And that book you have at your side there is about 445. So there's a big chunk that I have that never made it into the book. And it was perfectly correct. The advice and the support that I was getting about a little bit of self-editing and also the whole tiresome legal aspect of memoirs, which they took very, very seriously because...
right, you can't get in libel trouble or whatever.
No, and it's so easy for that to happen because you might say something that you think is funny, but it's not, it's offensive, And so I've been very careful about that. But I wonder if in those 300 pages that are sitting in a cupboard, there isn't something else, an addendum or I wouldn't say a volume 2, because I would be going back over the ground I've already covered. But if I thought there was something that would be interesting enough to reassess what is in that book now, printed, published, it might have some value.
I was listening to an interview that you did when your show Picard was new, and you were talking about when you started in amateur theater as a kid. And one of the things that you said was that you had never felt more safe. But Another thing that you said was that you loved working with adults. And I think if there is any marker of either gifted kid or kid with troubled parents, it is a desire to work with adults. Because you're like, don't worry, I'm already an adult.
That's very interesting. I shall certainly give that quite a lot of thought. I was always a little uncomfortable with children of my age, and I never felt uncomfortable with adults. Oh, I've met people who, I've been stressed about because they were so famous, or, that they'd been heroes of mine for so many years. That's happened quite a lot. Or people with important jobs. And I never felt vulnerable when I was with adults, especially my English teacher, because he had a sense of humor too. And he would tease me at times and make me laugh. And that encouraged me to trust him, that he was happy to be something more than an educator. He was happy to be entertaining and amusing. And of course, he was actually an amateur actor. I came from a community that was thick with us. And every church, every chapel, every institution had an acting group. So you were not thought weird or odd or affected.
It was just a club to belong to. It was a fun thing.
Exactly, it was. But a serious club. People were expected to give of their best and not to make fun of what we were doing. I think my respect for the work and my respect for others, because I've worked with some brilliant people, made me more reassured when I was around them than I otherwise might have been.
How close or far did you feel to acting for a living rather than as a thing that you did on evenings and weekends?
It was never a consideration of mine, and I had no ambitions in that direction, even though I loved the movies. And I went, in fact, I found in my diary, I saw 5 movies in 1 week. And that must have been my pocket money gone. I spent it all on cinema. And luckily, I've always looked older than I was, although people now tell me it's the other way around, and, which is very charming.
I think you have a quality of perpetual 45 to 50-ishness.
Oh, thank you so much. Good. I shall take that home with me.
Look, maybe I'm buttering you up. Maybe it's 55 now, but you look pretty great. I'm looking at your arm right now. I think you could arm wrestle me and win.
Yeah, I've always taken care of my body, and
but acting seemed far away.
Oh yes,
I mean, like acting for money, like acting as a life rather than a thing you did.
Absurd, ridiculous. I didn't go to the theatre much because we had a lot of theatre all around us, but I did do little things occasionally. And at school, I did quite a bit of acting because my English teacher was a director of actors and was an actor himself. I mean, an actor-teacher, not a professional. But it was him, it was Cecil Dormand, who said to me when I was 14, "Patrick, have you ever thought about being a professional actor?" And I laughed. I said, "No, of course not. I don't know anybody who's a professional actor, but I love doing it. It's great." And he said, "Well, you should think about it sometime." And when I got fired from my first job because I left school at 15 years and 2 days old, my education was over. I got a job on my local newspaper. Strings were pulled by my headmaster. That's the benefit of Rotary clubs, where all these important people, the headmaster of a school, the editor of a newspaper, they all are part of this social milieu. And they were very good to me on the newspaper.
Especially given that you were making up a fair amount of the news that you were reporting.
Yes, you have read the book. I did, because there came a point when I was about 14, 15, when I was working with 3 or 4, maybe more, amateur dramatic groups. And of course, we rehearsed in the evening when everybody had day jobs. And one of the problems of being a newspaper reporter, or rather a journalist, I like to say, was that a lot of the work is nighttime work. And but I always managed to cover it. I would get somebody to stand in for me, or I would get somebody I could call on the phone the next morning early and ask what happened and make notes and so forth, and then write something up. And then one day, there was a huge fire in a mill in downtown Murfield, where I was living, which was my little hometown. And the editor called the sub-editor, whose name was Charlie Pickles, which always seems to amuse people. And it makes him sound like a TV character. And he said, "Charlie, we've got to get somebody there. We've got to get one of our people there." And Charlie said, "Oh, not a problem, because Patrick Stewart's next door in the council house, in the council chamber, because he's at a meeting." Well, of course, I wasn't. And it all came out the next morning. And I was called into the editor's office, and he said, "Look, Patrick, I'm proud of the work that you've done. I think you could make a good journalist. But you've got to commit yourself to it. And that would mean, I'm sorry, but you're having to give up your amateur acting. And if you can't give it up, you're going to have to go." And I said, "I'll go right now, Mr. Wilson." That was my editor's name, Henry Wilson. And I went upstairs and packed up my typewriter, and which had been given me by my ex-headmaster. It was a very old typewriter. And I had a friend who was also working with me on the paper, a few years older than me and a grammar school boy. And he said, "Patrick, what you're doing, you can't give up this job. You're so lucky to have it in the first place. And you're never going to get another chance like this one. This is a career you're turning down." And I said, "I don't care. Acting's too important to me." And so whether I was just saying that to be surly and
which you
aggressive, which I probably was also proving to be true. And I then got a job in a furniture shop for a year. And during that time, I was working in the furniture store. I got a place in drama school, the wonderful Bristol Vic Theatre School, probably the best in England at the time. And I also got a grant from my county council.
To pay your way.
Oh, yes. When I came back from auditioning at Bristol, and Duncan Ross, the head of the school, who auditioned me, it was just the two of us in a room alone, and he didn't let me finish my audition. I'd done 3 pieces. I'd prepared 3 pieces. And he said, no, you don't have to do that, Patrick. Thanks so much for coming in anyway, and we'll see you in September. He was offering me a place right there and then on the spot. And I went home and I told my parents. My mother was dazzled. My father, though, frowned and said, "But who the bloody hell's going to pay for this? We haven't got the money, Patrick." And he was right. And it was Ruth Wynne Owen who said, "I think you should apply for a grant. And not just a little one, but a big one. Because who knows, you might just get lucky." And I did. I got very lucky, and I got what was called a county major scholarship.
I want to read to you this quote from a thing that Robert Justman wrote about casting you in Star Trek The Next Generation. This is like, I don't know, this is maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago that he wrote this thing. This is like remembrance of this process. And he said, this is before they cast you, he said, "We knew it was a man, and we knew he was French, and he was very hairy. Hopefully he was a handsome leading man. French, in fact."
Oh, my. Oh, Robert. And you know, he's the one who got me the job.
Yeah, it sounds like Gene Roddenberry was difficult to convince on that front. And understandably, I mean, he really wanted him to be a French guy.
Yes.
You're neither hairy nor French.
No, that's right. Appearance and background was non-existent. But Robert was the reason in the first place I got involved. I was assisting a dear friend, David Rhodes, a professor of English at UCLA. And he had asked me if I would illustrate a public lecture he was giving about Shakespeare by speaking some of the lines. And he'd invited an actress to come along so we could play scenes together as well.
And you're in your mid-40s. You're a successful actor in the sense that you had worked consistently throughout your career and had done some great roles in theater, but you weren't a name actor, even necessarily in the context of theater in the UK, more of a working actor.
Yes.
And certainly you weren't a famous person in the United States. You weren't, I don't know who they were auditioning to be this hairy Frenchman, but you weren't, whatever Paramount might have imagined might top line a franchise.
No. I know that to be true because of my decades of years of experience in Hollywood now. But I think underneath all of this, and things a few minutes ago we were talking about, I think there was an underlying assurance, confidence that my father had given me. When he walked onto the parade ground, the birds in the trees stopped singing. And I think that there were elements of that I took in and absorbed. So people were always, to my surprise, often enthusiastic about what I did, when often I thought it wasn't very good and I wasn't too pleased with myself. But that was what prompted the director to say, don't insure against failure. Doesn't help.
When you went in to audition for The Next Generation, did you pretend to be French?
No, I didn't pretend to be French. But
in the future, French people could have English accents. Why not?
I didn't, although we had a lot of fun over the years when I would say, space, the final frontier. These are the voyage of the Asna, and so on and so forth, just to wake people up in the morning, give them a laugh, you know. But I did have hair, even though I wasn't French.
It wasn't your hair, though.
I owned it.
Okay, fair enough.
It was a hairpiece. It was a toupee. And I was called back for the final, I think I auditioned at Paramount Pictures. I've driven past the front gates just now, where it all started. And I was told, there's just two of you now competing for this role. I never learned who the other person was. Some of my colleagues said they knew, but they were never going to tell me who it was. But
your hair was...
Yes, I flew on Friday from London to Los Angeles. When I got there on Friday evening, my agent landed. My agent called me and said, listen, there's a problem. Paramount wanted to know if you had a hairpiece or a wig or something that you could... They want to see what you look like with hair. And I said, well, I do, but it's at home. I left it in London. Why? I didn't know if you called me 2 days ago, I could have brought it with me. And they said, is there somebody at your home? And I said, well, yeah, there is. And they said, well, can we find it? So I made a call. It was taken to Heathrow put on an aeroplane, and they were told why this hairpiece was going. And then I drove over to LAX later that day and had it in my hands. And I wore it for the audition. Not to go to the audition, but they had brought in a hairdresser who helped me put the hair, and it was a beautiful hairpiece. I mean, I don't mean because it made me look beautiful, but it was just so real. And my audition was actually over very quickly. It was interrupted. In my second piece, and they said, thank you, Patrick. That's great. That's all for now. And I went back to my hairdresser, and she began taking it off. And she said, I think they liked you, because she was my hairdresser then for 7 years. And I said, oh, I don't know. And she said, yes, they did. Then there was a knock at the door, and it was all the Paramount Picture crew who'd been watching my audition. They were studio people. They weren't agents and, casting directors and things. They were the studio. And they came in and said, we just wanted to thank you once more another time for doing this. And I said, oh, thanks very much for this. And as I was talking, I took the hairpiece off and put it down. And then they left, and my hairdresser said, you've got the job. I know you have. They came in to see what you looked like with and without hair. That's why they were here. And you've got the job. Well, I was offered it an hour later. I wasn't offered it, my agent was. And there is an interminable anecdote about how I spent the rest of that day, which I will not go into now.
I kind of feel like the impression I get is that you were still holding your life very tightly at that point. I mean, you're in your late 40s then, mid-late 40s, like 46 or 47 or something. I'd been 45. I was just 46. And there's a famous story of you scolding everyone else, all the other actors on set, that they weren't taking things seriously enough, right?
That's true.
And, your divorce from your wife, who's the mother of your children, came only a few years into The Next Generation. You had a period of really serious depression and alcohol abuse and taking sleeping pills, among other things. And all of those things feel to me like holding your life tightly things, which is not what you project into the world now.
Thank you. I do feel more confident. I feel more assured. I have some wonderful friends. I have a fabulous, brilliant wife, and I am as happy as I've ever been in my life. And I don't know what lies ahead. I actually don't have an acting job. I've got a couple of offers on the table that might come to something. One of them is a very interesting offer. But I am coming to terms with it might be just, even though it could be gentle, but going slightly downhill now. I'm 83. I never expected to be 80, but here I am, and feeling good. But I'm preparing myself by not insuring against failure, but for essentially having to lead a different kind of life. In time, it will come. And you know what? I find myself curious about what it'll be. Because I have, as you said, I've worked all my life. I've hardly had, taking a holiday, taking my kids on holiday, it became very, very difficult because I was always working. And often it could be in Australia or Canada or wherever, But I am now in a place where I can feel and see gratitude for what I have been given. I don't just mean in terms of talent. I mean in terms of friendships, my wife now, influences, whom I could say, yes, you've got a big element of what I would like to have. And it's not about talent, it's about attitude.
There was a quote in the original press kit for Star Trek The Next Generation from you. You know, there's one of those fake interviews in there. And I found this when I was looking around at things. They ask you, like, how you feel about taking on this role in Star Trek. A classic question. You said, I choose not to think about it too much. And I thought, here's a guy who's coming to terms with this.
Yes. Well, I had to ask my children what Star Trek was. You know, the names of the actors meant something to me, and I was aware of that. But I'd remembered, because when I was working at Stratford-on-Avon and we had a house there, and I had a matinee and an evening show, I would race out of the theater, sometimes wearing my makeup after the matinee, and drive home so I could have my kids' supper with them. And sometimes when I came in on a early Saturday evening, they would be watching television. And so often they were watching this show with these guys in different colored T-shirts. But I had no idea what it was. And I had no expectation that I was destined to become part of that.
I mean, it's a lot of different things happening, right? Like, you're in a different country. You're making way more money than you had ever made as a 46-year-old man. It's kind of, you don't expect your fortunes to change dramatically so quickly. You're working on something that means everything in the world to some people, and you're trying to figure out what it means to you. Like, you signed up for 6 or 7 years or whatever your first contract is.
6.
You're dealing with that. You hadn't even done that much screen work. You know what I mean? Like, you'd worked on screen, but not in the way where you're in every scene and you're working 14-hour days.
No.
Like, all this different stuff that you're just trying to, like, the impression that I get is that you're trying to kind of hard work and not mess up your way through.
Yes. And that's, I think, what prompted my outbreak to my wonderful, beautiful colleagues on the show when I called a meeting and lectured them about the fooling around and the fun and games and the improvising that would go on. And I said, because it's not fair, because they're a crew here, and these crew, they work every day and all day. We get days off, we get late calls. And so I think we got to think about them. And, it was then that one of the cast said, "Oh, come on, Patrick, we've got to have some fun." And I said, "We are not here to have fun." And there was silence, and then they all burst out laughing.
I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about your show Blunt Talk, which was one of my absolute favorites. Now, this is a show where, in fact, I'll play a little bit of a scene from the show. This was a show that was run by the great Jonathan Ames, who is a very funny and strange man. And it was originally conceived by Seth MacFarlane, who was the creator of Family Guy, among other things. And he's famous for loving Star Trek and wanted to put you in a comedy because he knew you could do that. I always thought it was amazing that he decided to hire Ames to do it. Ames is such a person of such singular vision. And your character on Blunt Talk is a news anchor named Walter Blunt, a Briton, who is coming to cable news in America, sort of like Tell It Like It Is cable news. And it is such a strange psychosexual bouillabaisse, this program. And in this scene, your character is getting on a plane to Galveston to cover a hurricane, but has spent so much time in the bathroom messing with the toilet paper and the toilet seat covers that he has missed the plane.
I am so sorry. There's no boarding. The plane is closed.
That's not possible. You said I could go.
I know, but we boarded very quickly. It's the last flight to Galveston. We need to get it out.
You must open the gate and let us on board the plane.
I can't do that.
Yes, you can. You see, I have to be in Galveston tonight. I have a very important broadcast.
Ooh, I'm sorry, Mr. Blunt. It's a federal law.
But I don't care about asinine federal laws! I must be on that plane.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
My dear.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
My dear.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
What I like about the character is this. There's a lot of things I like about the character. I love the show. But what I like about it is, so if you say like, oh, blunt talk, straight shooting cable news guy, you think of maybe that clip of Bill O'Reilly where he's saying, we'll do it live, right? Where he keeps messing and he says, we'll do it live. Like you think of just an angry guy. And that scene is a nice distillation of the fact that this character is mostly a weirdly optimistic dreamer. Like the fact that his anger comes out of his conviction that they can. Like you could have played that as like you can open the door, like pointing a finger kind of you can open the door, rather than you truly seem to believe that anything you set your mind to is possible.
Yes. Well, I have enough recollection about that scene to know that I was tapping into Patrick Stewart in that scene.
Your character also does a lot of cuddling on a special cuddling mattress in his bedroom. I mean, in his office. Did you know when you agreed to do a comedy, did you know what was funny about you as a performer?
I suspected that I had a good idea. I'd done comedy in the past. In fact, when I began to make my headway with the Royal Shakespeare Company, it was in fact playing comic characters, usually servants or friends or wacky people, And I enjoyed that so much, finding humor in it, if possible. And I found that I enjoyed it more and more. And in recent years, I've been urging my team to come up with something comedic. And because I enjoy releasing that element of me to come out. Because, I mean, as all of my beloved friends in Next Generation will tell you, I could be a very funny guy. I mean, I was the one who came up with this thing halfway through season 2. And it was season 1 when I'd said, we're not here to have fun. Halfway through season 2, I said, okay, listen, I've come up with a plan. I called another meeting. And I said, every single one of us has got to come up with one funny something every day. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's got to be funny. And we've got to have laughs. And I mean, how did I move from that one to another one in the space of 1 year? Well, largely, I think it's the influence of Brent and Michael and John and Marina and Gates.
To be fair,
Navarre.
Sir Patrick, what you are describing is the comedy version of the first thing that you said. The second thing is the comedy. Like you went from we all have to be serious to we all have to be serious about doing a funny thing.
Yeah.
So maybe you had a way to go before full goofing around.
Yeah.
You have what's the story with your Band-Aid on your finger?
Oh, this is embarrassing. My wife, Sonny, and I have gone public.
We should discuss it on National Public Radio. Go ahead.
Okay. That we have a very, very special relationship with a squirrel in our back garden.
Yeah.
A squirrel that was known as Cecil the squirrel at first.
Cecil
until
the squirrel?
She became pregnant and she became Cheryl instead of Cyril. And my wife has gently, subtly developed this relationship over the past 3 years, which is when we moved into this house and inherited a squirrel and crows also. We have now 4 crows, the same crows who come to us every day. As yet, they're not yet eating out of our hand, but it's not far away. But the squirrel is. Cheryl, well, certainly for my wife, will open the kitchen door and call out her name, and she will come straight into the kitchen. And my wife will kneel down on the floor or sit on the floor, and Cheryl climbs into her lap. And she will let us touch the back of her head once or twice. That's all before she starts flipping it. And my wife is connected to her. I know that she is. Anyway, this morning, Sonny was out for most of the morning, and I could see that Cheryl was hanging about, and she hadn't had anything. And we keep nuts by the door, walnuts, because she loves them. So I went out and I picked the biggest walnut, and she immediately came over to me and sat on her hind legs with her paws in the air. And I had it in this hand, between my index finger and my middle finger and my thumb. And I held it out to her, and she put her claws up, went to hold it, and wasn't happy with that because she suddenly bit me. And she took about an inch of my finger into her mouth and sank her teeth. I mean, she went through my nail, right through my nail into the skin on the other side. And I howled. And of course, she pulled away from that immediately. So my relationship with Cheryl is now a little different because Sonny is convinced that she knows what happened and that she's uncomfortable about it. So somehow I've got to let her know, it's all right. It's all right. I wasn't angry at you. It was just pain that I couldn't tolerate. I know it sounds crazy, but the relationship with the crows is a magical process because they have just got more and more comfortable with us being around.
You're not going to die of lockjaw, are you? Well, I'd hate to have the headline in the New York Times say muscular 83-year-old celebrity Patrick Stewart dead from squirrel.
Well, my wife actually went online when she came back and saw what had happened because I've got 3 incisions in my finger, in the end of my finger. And she says the chances you have of you having caught something from Cheryl is very remote. The way that squirrels live and are and what they eat and where they reside and so forth, it is very unlikely that they have got anything dangerous in their system that they could pass on to you. So we're going to look after you when I get home from finishing our chat. We're going to have another inspection of what's going on, but that's had a whole tooth in that one there. That's the one that went down through my nail.
I mean, right now I don't see any foam at the corners of your mouth.
And if it comes, I shall blame it on you.
Well, fair enough. I mean, I shouldn't have bit you earlier, to be fair. My plan was to blame it on the squirrel. But, well, Patrick Stewart, I sure am grateful for your time. It was really nice to get to talk to you.
I've enjoyed it, and I must tell you that NPR have saved me countless times since I came to live here in 1987. So thank you, NPR, for the good times that you continue to give me daily.
I'll accept that on their behalf.
Thank you. And thank you for the conversation.
Of course.
It's been lovely.
Patrick Stewart, what a treat. His new book is called Making It So. You can get it wherever books are sold.
She'll always bring it home.
Our thanks to Jesse Thorn, Kevin Ferguson, and Richard Roby for letting us re-air that great interview.
FODs, hope you really enjoyed hearing that interview with Patrick Stewart. I know I did.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Amazing that he was at Max Fun HQ.
I know. Right here, we could have gone, man. We fucked up.
I know.
We got something pretty exciting coming up because we got, I don't know if people have noticed this, but kind of a long time before the next new Star Trek thing hits the airwaves over on the Paramount Plus app or similar, depending on what country you're in.
Sure.
So we've been kind of scratching our heads around here. What are we going to do to fill the time?
I proposed just taking a long break. But Ben was like, no. FODs depend on us.
Yeah.
For shows at least every other week. We got to be able to give the people what they want. But we need a theme.
We needed a theme. And I think you missed the meeting where we came up with the theme.
I did. Much like the Coco Nono episode that I blew, it will go down in history, the one production meeting that I missed, and will never be made to forget.
So this was a meeting just with me and Wendy, and we came up with this idea called pilot season. And what we're going to do is go back like kind of mid to late 90s to early 2000s, like all of the other sci-fi that was airing when TNG and DS9 and Voyager were on the air. What were they up against? What were their competitors? What was on TV that I couldn't watch because I used up my 1 hour of TV every week on Star Trek?
You need a hook for something like this, and I love that as the hook. Like, my hook is insufficient. My hook is like, I've not seen these shows. What are they all about? Ben's hook is, I was not permitted by my strict parents to watch television.
Yeah. So we're going to start with one that I think has been a big fan request over the years. We're going to start next week with the pilot episode of Sequest DSV. It's a two-parter, right?
Yeah.
You ever seen Sequest DSV, Adam?
I watched it all the time.
Oh, man. So this was one that you actually saw.
I was a fan.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Big fan. Watched it every week.
If you are in the U.S., I am told that Sequest DSV is available on the Peacock streaming app. We'll try and keep people apprised of where they can find these things as we go. For some reason, usually these are on Peacock, and if not, mostly on like YouTube, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so tune right back in next week, and we're going to present our review of To Be or Not to Be Parts 1 and 2 from Sequest DSV.
And the whole idea for pilot season is we're going to choose different series.
Yeah.
Every episode and bounce around, right?
Yeah, and we'll announce it at the end of each week what the next pilot is going to be.
Is that going to be in the show notes too? Is that a thing?
Yeah, probably.
Check our socials media and the show notes and all the rest.
Yeah.
So that you're all caught up with what we're going to be watching. Watching some weird stuff in the off season.
I couldn't be more excited.
Going to be great. Going to be better than taking a break.
I promise, Adam.
I love it. It's a great idea. Good job by you guys.
Greatest Trek is an Uxbridge Shimoda podcast on the Maximum Fun Network. It's hosted by Ben Harrison and Adam Pranica, and it's produced by Wendy Pretty. Another big thank you to the crew at Bullseye for letting us bring you this interview. Next week, look for that Sequest review to kick off pilot season on Greatest Trek. It's a two-parter called To Be or Not to Be, and if you're interested in watching these pilots along with other FODs, head over to the USS Hood Discord server at drunkshimoda.com, where you can join weekly watch parties throughout pilot season. As always, we want to thank the Max Fund members who support Greatest Trek on a monthly basis. We really couldn't continue the podcast without your support. If you'd like to set up a membership, you can do that at MaximumFun.org/join. And when you do, you get instant access to the entire catalog of bonus content from across the network, including a new episode of the Santa Monica Mountains podcast that just dropped this week. You can also support the show by leaving a 5-star review or just telling someone you know about it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on Greatest Trek.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows.
Supported
directly
by you.